Hello. I mentioned the other day that we did this new shoot, the last stuff we needed for the next episode, which is coming together. And I'm honestly, so I keep looking at this footage, thinking, oh, there's so much we could do with it. I could track and add all of these different things, and I always do that, and it would be fun. But I'm also really trying to keep myself from going too crazy on it because I want to finish this episode. But there's a lot of stuff I want to do with digital extensions here that is easy. Like, we don't need any green screen. Ideally, we don't need any rotoscoping or anything like that. So I thought maybe we'll go through a few tricks. I might not take every shot to the end, but just kind of showing the setup and how we get things prepared so that then we can start playing with everything. Starting with how to make footage work for you, what you can kind of get away with. And let's start with this shot. So we filmed this shot out of order. This is supposed to be one of the later shots in the sequence after it's pretty dark out. But because of the way the locations were working, and also it was raining and in January, and I was just trying to make sure we got everything. So we actually filmed this first. But there's nothing locking in the exposure here. And what I mean is, like, we can change this exposure to be really bright or really dark, and nothing will feel off about it. Certain things kind of lock in the exposure. If you have a visible light in the scene, like if you have a street light or something, people know how bright a street light is in comparison to like ambient light. So if you see that street light, then people know about how bright everything else is. Or if you have like a window in a shot, that's a good way to do day for night. If we were to take this shot but make it really dark but add in that bright street light, people go, oh, okay, so the scene actually feels genuinely dark because I can see how bright a regular light source I'm familiar with kind of looks, which means I'm able to darken this really easily. I can bring it into Blender. If I turn down the exposure, this still just feels fairly natural. It could just be this dark out. But I'm going to do this in the shader editor instead. And the reason it's so easy to work with is because light in real life works like light in Blender's path tracer, kind of. Like, it's all linear. If you cut in half the amount of light coming from the light source, all of the subsequent bounces and everything else is also going to be cut in half. So we can simulate that doing just a basic operation. Here, we'll do color, mix color. I'm probably making this sound more complicated than it is, but okay, I'm going to multiply all of these colors by value of 0.5, which means now every single thing is half as bright as it originally was. The sky's half as bright, all of the shadows and bounces and everything else are half as bright, or we could go 0.1, and it's still kind of mathematically accurate. It doesn't feel too unnatural. Wow, Ian, that's so cool and amazing. If you make an image darker, then it's darker. No. Well, yeah, but no, if you're in any sort of properly linearized environment and you multiply all of the values of the pixels by half, you're not just making it darker, you're like mathematically simulating what if there had been half as much light there to begin with when we were actually filming. Anyways, and I could push this even further by using another mix color node and dividing out a certain color. Here, let's mute this one really fast with M, and I'm going to use the eyedropper to select something that probably feels whitish, and if I hold down Alt, I can actually kind of like average out a range here. And if I turn the value all the way up, you can see we get rid of that purple cast a little bit. It's a really easy way of kind of resetting the white balance. I don't know how well that'll come through in the compression, but this just feels a little bit purple, and this feels just very, very flat white. And here, let's bring this one back, maybe turn it down a little bit. And the same thing if we multiply by a certain color value. Here, let's multiply by maybe some sort of blue. We can go in here and change the hue till it's something that we like, maybe like that. Turn down the saturation. But now we have this very good kind of late dusk feeling. There's nothing saying this isn't how we actually shot this, even though we filmed it, around noon, and it feels like the evening. So that's what I ran with. This is just kind of my first pass alignment shot, but I set this up yesterday, and I think it works pretty darn well. I might brighten things up just a little bit, but you can see because we have these bright lights here, and the Christmas lights are brighter than them, it actually does make it feel as if they're properly in this dusky environment. This box is also a little bit too bright. So let's jump into the scene. Here we go, and this is just my usual thing, which I think we'll get to in a second, where I track the shot here in Blender. In each one of these tracking points, I use way too much so I can get this little point cloud here, and you can see in this case, it's literally just two different planes. There's, this one and this one. So I model that and project the footage from the camera onto the geometry, and because everything's tracked nicely, it all just kind of plays plays nice. It only really works from the camera's point of view. Like if we're up here, you can see that their legs, like they're kind of walking along the back wall a little bit, which is kind of weird. But yeah, in the shot, it works pretty nicely. And then I'm bringing in all of these old scans I did, and I'm tweaking the material of this scan here just to make it match and blend in with this road a little bit. So I'm controlling the brightness. You can see if it's brighter, you can see the edge. I'm just trying to hide that seam, and I'm multiplying in or mixing in a little bit of a color here to make it really blend with that. And I'm also using this gravel where I'm doing the same thing just to make the silhouette, to make the seam between the footage and the CG stuff not really easy for people to identify. And again, this city is all temporary. This is going to be like an overpass with like a little freeway sign kind of thing there. It'll be better. We did try to get HDRIs of each shot, but they actually didn't turn out. We messed up a little bit, but that's okay because in this case, the overcast sky is so uniform that I can just literally have it be this flat gray and try to line everything up to it. I have this plane going over the top here to just kind of make the light. It's always, when you're shooting with natural light, it's always better, or it feels more cinematic to shoot into the light, to have things kind of rear lit, like shooting towards the sun or the brightest part of the sky. And that kind of like, it sculpts everything and it separates the layers and it reveals texture, as opposed to having the light flattening everything behind you. You can kind of see what I'm talking about if I delete that plane. Not much. I've got another video that demonstrates it a little bit better. But as always, what I like about doing it in the viewport is I'm able to bring the footage closer to the scene and the scene closer to the footage and try to just make everything play nice and meet in the middle. It's maybe not a particularly scalable pipeline if you were working like a big studio or whatever, but for my personal stuff, it works really good because I can take each shot kind of on its own basis. But let's get into the nitty-gritty a little bit, because that's where things start to become a little bit complicated. So we're projecting the footage from this camera, everything is tracked and lined up, but how are we projecting the footage? So in the olden days, here, let's give this a material and we'll call it, you know, whatever. We would add a modifier called the, what would it be now? The UV project modifier, where you would select, you'd have to first select your UV map and then also select the camera you're trying to project from. And that would make the default UV map that you have on the object be defined by the camera's view. But it was always really, really finicky. Let's project a brick texture onto the surface using the UV coordinates that are now being defined by the camera. And we could select that, but by default, it'll just use whatever one is in there. And if we go into rendered view, and now the camera defines the coordinates, but you can see it's kind of weird because ideally, if we're projecting from the camera, it should be totally flat, but it doesn't look flat. It's being really funky. And that's because it's also based off of the amount of geometry. So if we tab into edit mode, add some more geometry, it straightens up a little bit and a little bit more, which meant if you wanted to do this method, it still looks weird. You had to keep adding geometry, and even then it would never be perfect. It would just get, you know, better over time. Here, let's not, yeah, there we go. And now everything is looking how we want it to. This looks like nice square footage, but especially if you're doing complicated projections on lots of geometry, things could get really high res really fast, and it would kind of, there would be a lag. It just wasn't great. It wasn't great. So I'm gonna undo all of that geometry to show you the version that Nathan made. Because if we select this camera, install the Compify tools, and click New Camera Project Node Group, and then go back into Materials here, it creates a group for us, and we can just add Group Camera Project. And if we plug that into the vector, look at that. It just does it. It's just doing it great and perfect, and it's everything we want. We don't have to add any more geometry or anything. I don't know. Nathan works at the Institute now. I wonder if we could just get him to have this be in Blender by default, because it's so great. So now this should all make sense. We have our camera project node going into the video texture. We're dividing out a little bit of that color to set the white balance. Going into the emission, we can change the brightness of the footage by tweaking the emission value. And that's the output, but we can see a few weird things. One, it's repeating, and that's just because that's the default value. So I'm gonna change it from flat from repeat to clip, which means from the camera's view, it looks fine, but there is still all of this blackness just right outside the video frame. So if there's other stuff in the scene, like reflections, you might still be seeing weird black stuff. We can fix that by adding a transparent node, mixing that with the emission here, and controlling the mix factor with just the alpha channel of the video, where if it's video, it's 1, and if it's not the video, it's 0, like that. So now the material only exists where the camera's pointing, which works nice. But I wanted to do one more thing because I wanted to widen the camera a little bit. They're walking down a location that we've already seen, and this window here is really distinctive, and I wanted the audience to be able to see that, to be like, oh, this is the same location that we saw earlier. It's kind of implying like they built a bypass through their old house or whatever. And so I wanted to pull the camera back, but if we do that, you can see we're seeing off the edge of the footage. So I wanted to widen this camera's field of view a little bit. I can't do that with this camera because this camera is the projector. Everything's already lined up to the real camera. But we can add a second camera here and use a copy location to put it in the exact same place as this one. Have it look towards there and zoom out more than the original shot, kind of tilt it up like that. And that works pretty good, except now we're obviously seeing off of the original footage. It's not big enough to cover the entire view, so we need to be able to fill that in. And that's where things got unnecessarily tricky. Because we should be able to just very easily texture paint that stuff back in. And we're going to, but it's just not quite as easy as it should have been. So I'm going to get the projector camera here and this right here, and let's fill in all of this stuff. So, and just to overstate it, okay, so we're keeping the video here, but we're also adding a background image that should perfectly blend in with the video so that our digital new secondary camera can kind of look off of the original video if we want to. And to do that, let's create a new image texture here. I'm going to make it, 4,000 by 4,000. We want something fairly high res, and we will call this background image. And so far this plane, actually, I don't know what the UV coordinates are doing for it. We've been extruding stuff. They're probably pretty funky because we're just using the camera's coordinates. We're using Nathan's thing. So let's set up some UV coordinates for this image. Just going to tab into edit mode. I've added a bunch of new geometry just because I think that's probably a good idea. I'm going to hit U, unwrap. And now if we go into the UV editor, we can see our UV map. Here, let's make it fill more of this entire thing. Okay, and so now our new image here is using these nice UV coordinates on a 4,000 square canvas. It's ready for us to texture paint what we want onto it. In fact, if we plug this into the material output, we can see our image. It's just big and black. That's great. And even though we already did this work to make outside the camera view transparent, instead of transparent, we now want it to be our new extended image. So let's delete all of this stuff here. And now instead of black, we want it to be our background image, which right now is still black, so we're not really going to see a big change, but I'm going to add in a mix color node, and we want our background image to be in the background, so we're going to move it into the top slot. And I always think that's confusing, like why? Because I think of it in terms of like Photoshop or After Effects, where whatever layers on top of the stack, it's kind of like you're looking at a pile of images, in a collage or something. Whatever's on top is also on top. But Blender's thinking about it from like a development standpoint, where this is an order of operations. First, you put down this one, then you put down this one. So the background goes in the top first, and then after that, we lay on our video footage. And to control the mix between the two, we're just going to use our alpha channel again. Nice and clean. So now the black is this black image, and this is our video. So how do we turn the black into the actual video? Well, if we select the object and go into texture paint mode, we should just be able to paint right here and see what we're doing with the brush tool. I don't see anything, but sometimes that's because we're in Cycles, and Cycles kind of pre-bakes all of the textures and shaders and everything. But if we go into Material Preview, let's see what we see. Okay, and now we can see our brush strokes. If we go back into rendered mode, we'll be able to see it, but just you can't see anything you're doing until you leave rendered mode and come back. So let's stick in material preview here. Make sure that we're painting on the background image down here, as opposed to the other texture the shader is using, which is the video text. I don't even know what would happen if you try to paint on the video texture. But instead of this, we want to actually paint our view onto itself. Like, if we could just stick this here, be like, here, go, stick on this image, we'd basically be done. Unfortunately, they don't make it that easy. Like, first off, you'd think if you use the clone tool, there'd be some option for just like, hey, use these coordinates and just clone tool from the view of the camera onto it. So just let me do that. But it doesn't let you do that. It lets you clone from a paint slot, but it only lets you... It just doesn't work from a UV coordinate standpoint. It's using the default UV coordinates, and you have to reproject. But if it just doesn't work, Okay, so we're gonna go back into the draw settings. We're gonna create a new texture here. New. We're gonna call it the video. And again, because we're getting into like old Blender, everything becomes a little confusing. How do you say what this is? Well, we leave the tools and we go down to the texture tab here, at which point we make sure it's the video. We're going to load in the video. We're going to hit refresh to make it match the number of frames. We're going to make it auto refresh. Now, when we go back into the tool settings, we should have our video here. Let's change it to, well, tiled. Let's see what happens if we just start painting here. Well, we can't see here because right now the video's on top of it. But if we look over here, we can see it's definitely not doing it right. It's all being tiled and weird. Let's see what we're actually working on. We can do that by plugging our background image just straight into the surface here. Oh, like that. Yeah, that's not right at all. So ideally, we should just be able to stretch the video texture across the camera view, and then we could just be like paint like that. But the closest way that we can do that is to use a stencil, which appears like this as a square that's just kind of floating over the thing. And you move the stencil by right-clicking. In fact, here, let's turn on screencast keys really fast. I should have had that the whole time. You can shift-click to scale. You can like alt-click to rotate. I'm going to check image aspect, which matches it to the actual texture scale. Like, oh, I accidentally just rotated it. Here, let's reset transformation, reset the image aspect. And we have to scale this to match the view ourselves. This is my current wish list for Blender. That would be, can this just be a button? Because I feel like that wouldn't be very hard. Okay, but if we say that's about right, and we want this to be accurate because this is going to be the seam as the camera's passing. However off we are here is going to be how defined that seam is. But now that we have this, everything's already. Now we can paint here, and it's just the background video going onto the geometry. Yeah, that looks great. That's exactly what we want. Here, let's go back into the camera view. Let's go to the end of the shot. And the first thing you'll notice is that it doesn't update. We're still looking at the wrong frame of the video texture. They're still walking, and they should be walking off kind of into the... I know this is confusing. Like, what are we even looking at right now? But you can see that the stencil here is not matching up to the footage. And that's because even though we selected auto refresh, we have to uncheck it and check it again. And now if we go back, everything lines up the way it should. So just know we gotta do that for this workflow. But now we can easily paint this in like this. And it's weird right now that she's in the texture. So if we go back a few frames to before she's walked there and uncheck auto refresh. Oh, check it again. We can paint that bit again and she will disappear. And we're just going to kind of do that the whole way here. Now, the one thing that is weird is the reflections, because reflections totally depend on the angle you're looking at everything. So like at the beginning here, and we paint this in like this, we're locking in the reflections from that view. And here, let's go a little bit further so we can get Tom out of there. And that's just gonna happen. That's just gonna be kind of weird. And we have to hope that people just don't notice, really. And we'll get rid of Caitlin here. And now if we zoom out, we have just a clear big plate without anybody in it. We can see a reflection in here that looks a little bit weird. So let's see if we can fix that. I think that's a reflection of somebody walking by. Oh, now I'm painting that reflection back in, but maybe that's okay. And now we have this really annoying overlay from the texture paint. So let's go back into object view. I'm gonna make sure we save this really fast. We're gonna go down to background image and save as, yeah, background image. Just because Blender doesn't always, sometimes it just forgets, and you go, where is that image I made? Let's go back into the shader editor here, and if we plug this in now to our mix shader, we can see it's all working kind of how we want it. We can definitely see that seam there. There's a little bit of vignetting in the video texture, which means we're getting this kind of dark area right along the edges there. And I think also we might want to use this divide node after we combine them. So I'm going to put that in there and delete that. And yeah, that feels a little bit more natural, but we still have that vignetting. And so I made a custom fuzzy border kind of image, which looks like this, but all we care about is the alpha channel. Right now, this is alpha 0, this is alpha 1. So what we want to do is combine that fuzzy border with the nice crisp border from the original video that's being projected. So let's load in our image texture of that border. There we go. We want to use the same coordinates being projected from the camera, so it'll all still line up, as opposed to using the UV coordinates of the background image, which stretch across the whole thing. And actually, let me show you what we're doing, just a little bit more in case this is all getting a little bit abstract. Right now, if we look at the alpha channel of the image texture, we have this nice crisp border. And this border, if we look at the alpha channel, kind of has this fuzzy thing on it. In fact, we want to invert this, so let's use an invert node here. There we go. Now we just have this fuzzy blackness. And if we multiply these two values right here in this color mix node, and we look at that, now there's just this slightly softer border here. In fact, we can control the gamma a little bit and control how that fuzziness works. But now this fuzzified alpha channel is controlling the mix between the video texture and the background image, and you can see we can't really see our vignetting quite as much. You can still see a little bit, and you can definitely see what I was talking about with like the reflections kind of being a little bit funky. But if we go into the point of view of our new digital wider camera, you can see we've got the entire shot here, and we don't really see the seams causing too much mischief. So as you're looking over here, if you're looking specifically at the reflections, you can see things at some point get kind of weird, but like right there, you can kind of see a dissolve, but not in a way that's particularly noticeable. And there are tools for helping to fix the vignetting. We could also like create our own gradient in the shader editor and multiply the values to try to cancel that out if we're feeling really like going above and beyond. Or if we film like a white wall, or maybe even just like a flat overcast sky with the same f-stop probably, and just invert it and add those values, that would probably cancel it out, I think. So yeah, that's that shot. I think once I add the different freeway signs and get rid of these stupid buildings, I think it'll work really good. And it's one of those shots I'm proud of because I don't think people, especially areas like this, I think I match stuff pretty well. I don't think people will be able to tell where things start or end. It'll just feel like a nice, natural kind of shot. I think it really captures that kind of like late dusk kind of feeling. So what's next? I've got some bedhead. At least it's backlit. Let's do this again, but this time in kind of a best case scenario or a more straightforward scenario where the camera isn't moving, it's just looking around, it's just rotating. So let's open up our motion tracker. Let's load in the clip. Got my image sequence here. Gotta open it up, set the scene frames, and hopefully there's footage here. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so this one is obviously we're cranking it. It was really dark at the time, but I'm gonna turn it all down to be darker for the actual comp. But to track this, we don't even need all that much data. Here, we can just let's set the pattern size like 40, and probably that's fine. We're gonna track location, normalize, sure. I'm gonna go to normalize, start in the middle and track in both directions, but I don't think we really need to do that in this case. And I'm just gonna grab some of these points here. These barnacles make tracking very easy. Maybe we could track over here. I don't even know if we need to, though. If we just get enough here. And then we hit the track forwards button. And I got coffee. What's funny is the Blender tracker could actually track this whole thing in like a second. It's the speed of loading the frames in the movie in, not actually the analysis that takes a long time usually. Okay, so we've got all of this. It looks like everything's relatively stable. It's very easy to work with. We're gonna go to solve, check tripod, which tells it we're only looking at the rotation, not the 3D movement, which makes the stakes much lower. But before we solve it, I'm gonna go to track, go down to the camera settings here, make sure they match my camera. In this case, it totally does. 35mm sensor, 24mm lens. I'm so glad the Blender's defaults also happen to match just the defaults I regularly shoot in. So if we solve camera motion, solve error, 1.1 pixels. We can clean that up if we check clean tracks and let's say anything with reprojection error of more than 1.5. Those ones, let's get rid of them and solve it again. Great, half a pixel on a 4K image filmed in the dark. That's pretty good. So now we're gonna go into layout here. We're gonna create a camera that has those same settings, which is a 24mm lens, and the sensor for this is for some reason 36. That's very weird. And under constraints, we're going to give that motion we just tracked with the camera solver. And it's very subtle because the original shot wasn't moving much, but that's our movement right there. Maybe make it so it's looking more or less straightforward. And we could just put the video right in front of the camera, but I'm kind of used to doing it this other way, I'll show you. So I'm going to create a plane here. I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. Then I'm going to shift-click on the camera and say copy location, which puts the origin right on the camera's location. Then in edit mode, I'm going to just bring this back and make it so it fills the camera view like this. Make sure the camera never goes off of that. Great. And what's cool about this is we can scale it to be like stuff in the distance if we're trying to do multi-layer scenes or something up close. And from the camera's point of view, it always looks the exact same scale because it's scaling away and towards the camera. Anyways, overcomplicating things. Let's set up our footage really fast. New material. We're going to call it footage. We're going to make it... let's just do it in the shader editor here. We'll slide this open. Shader editor. Going to delete this. I'm going to create an emission shader here, and I'm going to plug in our footage into it. There we go. Check auto refresh, which stretches the footage across the entire thing. But if we select the camera and use Nathan's add-on new camera project node and go back into the shader editor here, we can use that instead of the UV coordinates. And hey, look at that. Instead of repeat, we'll go to clip. And we could have this mix with a transparent shader, just like we did before, and use the alpha channel to combine between the two. So now we just have our footage floating there in space. And from the camera's point of view, we still see the camera motion. But if we move outside of it, we can see it's actually a little bit stabilized. Like you can see the footage plane is moving, but the footage itself isn't moving all that much. We are still getting a tiny little bit of parallax if you look in the top right, and that's because just moving the camera, rotating the camera, means the lens is moving a little bit, but I don't think we're really gonna care about that. And the nicest thing about this is that we can literally just tab into edit mode, tap K to use the knife tool, and cut out what we want to keep and what we don't. And this is just the nice, ugliest brute force way to get a quick little like garbage mat. And I'm going to try to keep the line kind of inside of the actual boundaries. I think that's going to make things a little bit easier. Cool. Let's say we want to keep that stuff right there. So I can select that, Control I, invert the selection, and delete those faces. And look at that. Now our mask is basically like locked to the camera view. That's handy. And here, let's put a plane back in there. I kind of still want to be able to see what I'm doing. Stick it back here. No matter what we do to this, it's always going to look normal from the camera's point of view because it's being projected from the camera. It's only when you get offset that things get a little bit weird. But one thing we can see is we've got all these cool barnacles going on here. That silhouette really helps define the grunginess of the location. Let's get those back here. I'm gonna get this piece out of there, and let's try to model some barnacles if we can. I don't know how this is gonna work, but if we do this and that, inset all of these. Extrude them. I'm going to extrude them all the way up here and then set proportional editing to random, move it down, and just try to rough it up a little bit here. And then if we take all those and flatten them down a little bit, twist them all up. Sure. But now if we line these up with the barnacles and give it that same material, we can just stick our barnacles anywhere we want to get that, make the silhouette a little bit more interesting. And again, it'll just move across all the footage and working pretty good. Honestly, I thought that would make a bigger difference. Oh well. And this works okay for kind of like a quick type job. But there's all this softness, in the edges here, and there's all more stuff that we'd really want to trace. I mean, again, especially you get to barnacles and stuff, we'd be losing all of that texture. So let's see if we can kind of figure out how to automatically keep some of that by doing a luma key. So I'm going to take this plane here and hit P, separate by selection. So now it's its own object. And I'm going to make it its own material too. But first, I want to prep the footage a little bit because I could imagine at some point we might want to tweak the white balance or the brightness of the footage, and we wouldn't want to do that across all the different materials to make the footage match. So I'm going to group it right now. Here, let's add our little mix color thing here too, just in case we want it later. And if I select all of this and hit Control G, now we've got our own little group that we can tab in and out of. And we can just put this anywhere. In fact, let's name it properties. This will be footage. Great. Okay. So now when I make this a completely new material, we'll call this Luma key. Yes, we can still go into our footage node here and change the brightness of this, and it affects the video in the other material too, which is a handy thing to do. Okay, so how are we going to do this? Instead of using the alpha channel to combine between the emission and the transparent shader, let's use the footage itself. So we drag that in there. Right now, the brighter it is, the more visible it is. So the dark areas are almost invisible, bright areas are still there. But we want to invert that, so I'm going to use a color ramp here and just swap these values. Right now, look at that. We're only keeping the very brightest highlights, which is actually kind of interesting. That could be handy sometime. But let's swap these here. And if I bring the black down, we're going to see the bright areas start to disappear. And if I bring the white up, we're going to keep those dark shadows a little bit crisper. And obviously we're losing those bright areas on the pole, but from the camera view, because we still have our other piece here in the foreground, that's totally fine. And I'm going to duplicate this one more time, put it way in the distance, but I'm going to use the original version of the material without the Luma key on it. So now everything looks normal, but we could put a little cube here, darken it up a little bit. And we can put it behind these poles here. And this is the problem you get with Luma keys, is there's always this kind of feathered edge as it goes from dark to brighter to the clip-off point. And we could, in our layer here, try to kind of fix that a little bit. Like if we pull this like that. But usually that comes at a trade-off. Although in this case, it seems to have only done good. And also, we still have the gain cranked a lot on this footage layer. So let's go into our footage group. And we are going to multiply this by, like, let's say 0.1 and turn up the factor. And when we do that, I see it affects because this is happening before we're setting the values of the Luma key. It's completely changing that whole thing. Well then, okay, this footage group didn't make sense, but the concept is still sound. If we go mix color here, and we will say multiply by 0.1. And we group that, so that's just the only the only thing in that group, and we will call this our color tweaks. Then we go back into our other Luma key pass, and we apply that same color tweaks node to the emission without going to the color ramp. And now we can have everything darker while also keeping our Luma key from before. And you'll notice we can see this bar through some of these poles a little bit, but remember, that's what our foreground layer is for. And it's as easy as just like, let's grab this right here, line it up, extrude it down, and we still get those nice soft, kind of slightly softened edges with the convenience of just being able to mask by extruding all these faces everywhere. And yeah, that looks cool. Again, imagine we were trying to add like a freeway overpass or something, kind of like, or a new bridge or something. This would work. This would work great. Or let's try to add like a big building kind of in the distance. I'm just gonna go back here and create a cube. I'm gonna give it a new material. It's gonna be emissive. And we'll see how well this works, because there's a lot of grain here, and we're going to be sticking something in that is distinctly ungrainy. But that's why I like to plaster everything with grain at the end, anyways, to kind of hide that. But this emissive color is going to be, let's use this and alt drag around here to get a nice good sampling of that. And now this blends in pretty darn well with that. That's kind of cool, these big sentinel building type things. And I set up this Luma key here actually to put stuff in between the hill and the poles. But we can go in and tweak this a little bit, and I think see if we can make the buildings fit in the scene a little bit better. Yeah, like that. They're kind of blending into the haze, and they're sitting behind the hill. And again, everything is still working. It's all locked to the camera view. What else could we do with this? And what I'd actually been planning on doing was adding this kind of overhang here, as if they're, they're underneath that pier. And so let's try adding that really fast. I don't really have the camera angles lined up right. I should have, like, you can see we're looking up, but the horizon's at the middle of the scene, so we should actually be looking straight out. But I don't know exactly the easiest way to fix that right now. But let's make this dark here. Let's just add some little boardwalk junk or something and see if this works at all. Oh, and right now this is still in the haze for the background, so we can just grab this with the Luma key and scale it up to give ourselves more room to work it with here. Put this down in between. Maybe we'll even bring in like a little photo scan. I've got my old kind of gunky scans here. Yeah, let's use that one. Cool, and maybe here, I'll bring in a little bit of red into the ambient sky color too, just to make it match this stuff a little better. And let's put Juliet out there too. Go get in there, Juliet. You're gonna be standing on a distant rock. Let's put the backpackers up here. Yeah, there we go. And I don't know, maybe if we turn the exposure back up, this might all fall apart. But no, we've still got some leeway. This is looking pretty good. If we want them to actually be behind that wall, we just have to move them this way just a little bit so they're actually behind that plane. And let's add some lights here too. I've got the image, the footage that I filmed years ago. I think I released basically all of this as asset packs. If you search like video textures or twinkling water textures. But if we have this, and then we go into the shader editor, and we use an add shader to add the values of our harbor here with whatever's behind it with a transparent shader, and connect that to the surface. We can stick this down here on the horizon, and I think it works okay. If we want, we can always duplicate this layer here. Let's scale it down just a tad, and I'm going to make this even a new version of the Luma key. And we could dial in the Luma key just to keep these posts here in the foreground without all the background stuff. You can see the difference it's doing right there. And we'll bring this in front of that one. And there we go. So now we basically have two Luma keys. One is very forgiving so that these buildings will go in the haze. That's this background one here. And this foreground one is set up to only really get those pilings in the front. And so we can kind of like, this is the stuff we want to be in the water. And this is the stuff that we want to be kind of off in the distance. And this is where it starts to get confusing. If you're like, Ian, I'm out. This is getting weird. That makes sense. I like this additional brightness though. And we can also combine that with a multiply if we want to give it some sort of little pizzazz. Be like, you're the purpleites, yeah. You can also, here, let's put it through an emission shader editor so we can make it like really bright if we want to. And just while we're doing stuff, let's go into the buildings here, and instead of emissive, because that's just making it a solid colored silhouette, let's put in a diffuse and see if this becomes bananas here. We can darken that up a little bit. Yeah, it looks okay. I mean, this model is not doing us any favors. It looks very CG to begin with. But if we grab one of these faces here and hit Shift-G, select coplanar. Oh, it's all on the slope. Okay, well, we can just select all of these, duplicate them, go to individual origins, scale them up, give them all a new material, assign this new material, or make it emissive, and let's make it that same kind of purple. And cool, and again, it's all just, you know, we could just render this out and it would all just work. So obviously some of you are probably wondering, what do we do about her right here? Because she's not dark enough to really cast a proper silhouette like the pilings. And there's no real easy answer to that. You gotta rotoscope. I've been using the magic mask and resolve quite a bit, which has been giving me really good results. We could also just, you know, we could kind of hack it a little bit. If we go 90 degrees here, bring this into the foreground, give it this same material as that. Do a quick kind of roto job here. There are actual roto tools in Blender, but they're usually for the compositor. And for some reason, I always like doing everything just totally in the in the viewport like this. But then if we turn on automatic keyframing here, we can kind of move this here and go earlier. And this is a fuzzy one. We've got some leeway here. So you can see, especially if we did like another pass for, you know, down here and kind of chunked in that part and maybe another one for her head, you can see we'd actually get her in there without too much trouble. There, she's working all right. But yeah, okay, I was gonna do more, but this is we've been doing weird stuff for probably about an hour here. So Yeah. All right. Thanks for hanging out. I've got one more of these I want to do, where they're dumping the cans into this kind of like recycle machine. It kind of gives you money for cans. And so I might want to like put them into a little alcove here and then add a machine that kind of lines up. The angles are weird. Definitely. That's going to be the trick here. But I want the machine itself to be kind of glowing a little bit, like it's sort of a vending machine. So I've got this yellow light. Trying to get all that stuff to blend could be interesting. My guess is it's going to be damage control, because if we have the box here, what are these legs doing? Maybe we don't worry about that. But maybe that'll be a like trying to properly do a thing sometime in the next week. But yeah, all right. Hopefully there's something useful in this. We kind of got a little bit fast and loose. But yeah, talk to you soon.